So this, of course, is about extending your experience to mobile devices. I'm Derek Snyder. I'm a product manager at Microsoft. During the session, we're also going to have a few other folks presenting alongside. We actually have Kelly, who will be presenting from GoToMedia, which is her own company, and so she's a third party, and she'll be talking about kind of what they've done to put into practice some of the design patterns for mobile that we'll be talking about. And we're also going to have John Sangiovanni, who also works at Microsoft, and he specifically is commissioned by Microsoft Research to work on a couple projects, and we'll be showing some really cool stuff that we'll be doing in the future. So we only have 90 minutes total, and that's going to include some time for discussion, so we'll want to get going right away. So really the first question is, what is mobile browsing? What are some of the ways we're going to be thinking about this? So we kind of have this challenge when you look at the mobile web. We have, of course, all these web pages are out there that are going to be up there in the cloud, and somehow they need to kind of get to this entire world of devices. So we have the laptops, we have the PCs, and then all of a sudden we have all these different hardware manufacturers and mobile operators that are producing phones and PDAs, and how are your web pages going to look on that? And so that's the real challenge, right? To create not only an experience that you can see on the device's screen, but maybe one that's optimized for that specific device. So just want to give you a couple examples of some browsers that are out there, the major browsers. Of course, the first one is a standard WAP browser. So of course, this usually has some strength with text. And of course, you can do some bitmap imagery, but of course, it has to all be in the WAP standard. This is really where it all started, mobile browsing. You can see that there used to be these kind of specific SDKs. So Sony Ericsson would come out with their device, like the T610, and they'd say, if you want to develop for the mobile web, you need to grab our SDK, and here's how you can get up and running with a WAP site. Now, things have begun to evolve a little bit more, although WAP is still a major presence in the browsers for mobile devices. This one is an example of Opera. And what their browser actually does is they actually take images and they actually compress things down. So it is a pretty fast experience on the client side. So when you're going ahead and visit a real web page that's out there, Opera actually takes the images and may compress them or resize them, make them into thumbnails. It'll actually go ahead and serialize the images so they fit well into one column and present a pretty usable experience from the device. So that's another one to highlight. Another example is this is the up-and-coming web browser for Series 60. So this is what Nokia is going to be putting on their phones. And this one actually is based on a lot of the same technology that some of the other Pixel browsers that are out there. Basically, the browser here gives you a snapshot of what the desktop side type web page looks like, and then you're free to zoom around and actually click. Now, none of this is actually editable, right? You're not able to select text or anything like that because essentially you're looking at a bitmap. And it's just basically applying mapping points where you can go ahead and click on different links and stuff. It goes ahead and retrieves that data. If you want to input text, you have to click. It figures out that it's a text box and then gives you a separate interface to put in that text. And of course, this is Internet Explorer Mobile. So this is what we offer on Windows mobile devices. Microsoft, of course, is putting big bets behind the mobile space, and this is what the browser looks like. Of course, it has a lot of similarities to the Internet Explorer on the desktop. Everything from the tap and hold dialog you can see in the center where you can go to full screen, you can add things to favorites, you can go ahead and save an image or save a link or something like that. You can see the Save As dialog on the left. So it's actually a pretty good experience. Even in some of our legacy devices, on the right is a screenshot from Windows Mobile 2003. You can see that it still does a pretty good job bringing down web pages that really exist out on the web. So not necessarily specially formatted web pages, but rather web pages that would look good on your PC actually look pretty well on your device. And that's due in part to a lot of the investments our Internet Explorer teams put into, say, one-column view and desktop view and default view, which basically format where everything goes on the page to make it more accessible from a device. So I wanted to give you a little snapshot at what device rendering looks like. So I figured pick on ourselves first. This is what the MSN.com page looks like on kind of a variety of devices. We have the Sony Ericsson W900 Walkman on the left. And that's actually a great music phone. So they really put a big investment behind, kind of having that converged device. But it also has a browser in there. So we were like, all right, that's cool. Let's see what MSN.com looks like. Well, to tell you the truth, it didn't even come up. On the top one there, that's the Palm Trio 700W. So that's actually running Windows Mobile, and that has the Internet Explorer Mobile I just talked about. So you can see a story there. It's pretty clear what's going on. The bottom is a Palm Trio 650, which is still running Palm OS with the Blazor browser. So you can see, again, kind of the same story, but obviously we have the back and the next. There's a little too much space there. It's kind of not taking advantage of all the screen real estate. And then on the right, to tell you the truth, the Nokia N70 browser probably fared the best. It seemed to fit everything pretty well. I can see some major bullets there a little more clearly. I can see what kind of links to click on. So, of course, MSN got its act together and released a MSN Mobile, which is mobile.msn.com. And I'm now taking a look at that from the exact same devices. And you can see immediately, not only are you just getting kind of a sense of what's on the page, maybe like the most recent highlight story, but you're also getting very actionable links now. So when you go ahead and go to mobile.msn.com from these devices, you can see, oh, maybe I can do a search. Maybe I can take a look at Hotmail or, go ahead and look at MSN Spaces. So it really makes that menu experience front and center and then worries about all the content later. It basically gives you to the front what you may be interested in, and if you'd like more depth, you can go ahead and find that. And so that's the fundamental question we may be asking today. Are we going to be developing for the mobile web, or are we going to be developing for the desktop and just hoping that everything on the client side gets taken care of? And so that's something I definitely would like to engage with you guys in discussion on. So there's different ways to design. I kind of alluded to this. So do you design for mobile first? Do you design as a companion? So I mean, think of it in terms of these devices as phones. I mean, they have things that your desktop doesn't. For instance, camera. For instance, the ability to make a phone call or have ubiquitous data connections. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of market opportunities, I guess, if you have a site out there where you can basically expose certain services only to your mobile users and help extend your reach, make it a valuable proposition. So do you design for the desktop first? Like I said earlier, do you count on like the Internet Explorer mobiles or the Nokia Series 60 browsers to do all the work for you and to make that a good experience? And maybe you do, you never know. And what about adaptive rendering? I'll give you an example of that in a minute, but that basically detects what type of device is visiting and gives you basically an accessible page based on that device so that you're not putting too much hardware, horsepower behind a device that may not be able to handle it from the client point of view. So the first design pattern we want to talk about is minimizing the number of round trips. So we're going to give you the why, an example, and then how on each of these. The data network usually has a very high latency. I mean, we're seeing a lot of 3G networks kind of coming to bear, and Kelly may talk about this a little later. But basically, 3G isn't here yet, so we can't assume these high-speed data connections. You can kind of assume that data may be ubiquitous, but you still want to make sure that if the data connection drops off, that your web application can do something to make up for that. So that's all that to say that loading images and external script libraries and all this, I mean, you'd want to reduce the number of times that it has to go back to a server. A great example is Windows Live Mobile. So you can go ahead to the page I showed you, mobile.msn.com. You can do a search for a web page. And what it does is it actually offers you a mobile link at the bottom of each kind of search response. So you can do a search for anything, any site that's already out there, so maybe in ebay.com. And then it offers you this mobile link. And what it'll do is on the server side, strip away things that may not be relevant to the device. So maybe large image maps, again, doing kind of what I talked about with Opera, basically serializing the images, making thumbnails. And so Windows Live Mobile does a great example of that. So it really reduces the number of time it's going back up to the server to get new information. And from a device, I mean, that could be 5, 10 seconds saved, 15 seconds saved. You don't want people waiting that long. So the how behind this is to basically consolidate data. I mean, use text wherever possible and try to merge those large image maps into one image, if any at all. The next kind of design pattern we're talking about is adaptive rendering. And now this is a particularly cool one. So every phone is different. I mean, you have all these different devices out there. Perhaps some phone devices have a full QWERTY keyboard. Perhaps they have a 640 by 480 screen. But then again, a lot of folks still see the value in this 12-digit regular style phone. And how are you going to basically address all these markets? There's this statistic out there that you basically need to develop for 147 phones to get to 80% of the market. So adaptive rendering could really help. So basically what it could do is read the device ID tag and take a look at what kind of device it is, what it's capable of. Does it have a keyboard? Does it have this type of screen orientation? And basically present the end user with a web page that's suitable in terms of capabilities to that particular device. So a great example of this is the ASP.NET mobile control adapters. And they can automatically do what I was just telling you, generate code based on their requesting device. So you go ahead and inside of Visual Studio or ASP.NET, you have your web page set up, and it detects what type of device and will format it for that device. So the how behind this, of course, is to write device-agnostic websites. Make sure not to assume anything. Use adaptive rendering and customize the experience based on the device. And to kind of give you an example of what this looks like, we'll show you here. This is OpenWave, just a web browser on the left. Monochrome, I mean, this is really a legacy phone. And then on the right, we have one of the Windows Mobile-powered smartphones. And you can see that it's the exact same content. It's coming from the exact same source, but obviously the experience is customized. And this is all done with server technology in concert with the client accessing it. So you can see kind of the advantage of this, right? Getting to that 80% market share number might be a lot easier when you're using something like adaptive rendering technology. And we'll actually have a demo of that a little later. So another great one is don't port the desktop. I mean, a phone is not the PC. So you want to think about features that don't make sense. So if you're having an application or a web application that's a mapping program, maybe the printer-friendly version isn't going to be the most important feature to expose to a mobile phone user. You want to think about site navigation. You want to think about maybe limited input, maybe just the jog wheel, for instance, or the joystick. Great example of this is Gmail. So a lot of us probably have Gmail accounts. It's just elegance when you go ahead and start a new email from within the small web browser on your phone, and you realize that they've really done a lot of work to not put fluff in. So it has a to field, it has the subject, and maybe the message body, and that's it. If you had taken the desktop version and ported it over, you'd have BCC and CC, you'd have attachment fields that maybe you wouldn't even be able to take advantage of. So really thinking about what makes sense to include on your mobile version. So again, cut features you won't use, keep the design simple, and focus on tasks and what's important. So maybe creating a companion is the right thing to do. Extend your reach. I mean, in markets like India, mobile phones are completely trumping PC sales, right? So maybe to reach those new markets, you need to think about what you can do on the mobile phone side. So a great example of this is Flickr, actually, has gone ahead and allowed a mobile companion where you can basically snap a photo with your camera phone and upload it right over the internet to your Flickr site. Now, if you think about it, inherently, this doesn't make a lot of sense on the PC. I mean, if they offered a feature, say the same feature on the PC, it was like, hey, take a picture and have it email to your Flickr account. I'm thinking, why can't I just upload it? But from the phone, that makes perfect sense. So again, basically putting in features that only matter or that would really be an advantage to have on the phone. And so the how behind that, of course, is to use features unique to a phone. Think about things the phone can do. I mean, it has that camera on there. So what about something with OCR recognition? And again, what about something? What about the fact that it can, make calls, for instance? So input less text. So we have these limited input methods on the phone. I mean, sometimes they may have a QWERTY keyboard. Sometimes they may have just a 12-digit or something like that. So think about how users can have a better experience because they're not constantly repeating the data that they're inputting. So a great example of this is the Passport mobile credential. So on the Microsoft side of things, when you sign up for a .NET Passport, you can assign a mobile credential account on top of that, which basically, instead of putting in your blah, blah, blah at hotmail.com and your password and all this, you can actually just assign it a simple numeric phone number and a numeric password. And you think about it, I mean, most phones have at least a numeric keypad, right? So it makes it a lot easier when you're trying to authenticate yourself, just putting in the phone number and a numeric password. So always design for the lowest denomination when possible. So if you're trying to get that wide market segment, you really want to just assume at base just numeric. And so that makes things a lot easier. And also think about creative caching, the ability to, of course, not have users have to constantly re-enter the same information over and over again. If you've asked for their email address before, don't ask for it again. Little things like that really can discourage users from using your experience. And the folks that really are investing in a big way in some of these design patterns have really taken off their mobile presence. So it's also important to use the phone. It's not a computer, it's a phone. So make sure to use the differences to your advantage. Windows Live Local Search is a great example of this. So you can go ahead and do a search. Actually, Google Local does the same thing. Suppose I'm searching for a barber shop and I type in my zip code. Not only does it give me search results with the phone numbers and with the address, but those phone numbers are hyperlinked. They use this tel : / code snippet, and basically what it allows you to do is make a phone call from within your web application, from within the web page. And that just makes perfect sense. So I see this phone number, I want to dial, and I can go ahead and create that call right from the website. So make sure to, like I said earlier, take advantage of the phone specs, OCR and camera and all these things that maybe you could do. What if the local search could actually figure out where you are? What if you just said, find me barbershops near here? Why am I still putting in the zip code, for instance? Also important to know your limits. I mean, these are not necessarily computers. They don't have unlimited battery and processor and memory. So the phone can't necessarily optimize its battery when you're doing tasks that weren't meant for it. For instance, recurring tasks and scripts. Animated GIFs is a great example of this. They're constantly running, and without a timeout being put on there, often it can drain a phone's battery faster than it would normally. And folks ultimately will experience pain over this and stop using the web app. So make sure to, limit the scripting and avoid animations, set timeouts, so this sort of thing doesn't happen. One-handed navigation. So this is kind of a baseline, obvious one, but people generally use phones one-handed. As much as we wouldn't like to admit it, I mean, a lot of people are doing things while they're driving or while they're walking, and generally they don't always assume that they would have two hands free. So common actions should kind of always happen in one dimension. So that is to say, when they're looking at your website or something, side-to-side scrolling is never a pretty thing, right? So ESPN Mobile is a great example. You go to the ESPN site from a device. It gives you a special formatted version, brings down images and text and everything. It looks like a great experience, but never once do you have to side-to-side scroll. So make sure to always keep people in one axis. They shrink down the images, layouts change. So, the real takeaway from this one is just try to make the page vertical, or at the very least, just keep it in one direction. And that'll help folks when they're one-handed. Also, test on real phones. Emulators do a great job, but you can't necessarily get a real sense of your customer pain, right? So if you're firing up an emulator, for instance, you may not have any sense of how fast the network is or how it will render on the screen. So it might be a lot different than the actual phone experience. And so the example of this is the fact that we have these design patterns. I mean, if everything was in this cookie-cutter world and everyone was able to actually, develop great web apps and just test them on all their respective emulators, we wouldn't really have to say these things today. But we have this world where people are using real phones and real networks, and the networks sometimes are there, sometimes they're not. And keeping all these things in mind will really help have a better experience. So the how there is, of course, to test on real phones and allow you really to get a sense of the customer pain that they may or may not be going through. How long does that, if we're going to include that image or that image map, how long does that really take to download on, say, Singular versus, Verizon or T-Mobile on this specific device? And so the final one actually is allow for operator branding. And so anyone that's ever worked in the mobile space before, they probably know that this is an operator's world. They call the shots ultimately. So app discoverability is the #1 pain point for a lot of ISVs, for a lot of developers. Mobile operators, kind of control what gets on or off their devices, or at least what they're going to promote on or off their device, or what they'll make difficult to have on. So a great example of this is Handango. Handango is a third-party distribution channel. They push out content for Windows mobile devices, Symbian, Palm, you name it. And what they've done to really stay current is allowed operator branding. They use cascading style sheets so operators can put in their logos or have the Handango store powered by, the Verizon store powered by Handango, for instance. And because of this, they've gotten on the deck with Verizon, with T-Mobile, I believe, as well. And it makes things a lot easier, right? Because you're able to have that discoverability option. So cascading style sheets is the easy fix here. So make sure that whatever you're doing, it's extensible. So if you really want to get on the operator's deck, make sure that you can swap out color schemes, right? Vodafone's very big on this one. Or also logos, be able to change those on the fly to match the operator. So we're going to say a few things just briefly. The W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, is actually working on some standards, the .mobi kind of stuff, but they haven't really come to a lot of formalization on that yet. But this is just certainly a link to keep watching as we get closer and closer. But again, I think they're wrestling with that same question that we are. It's whether or not we're looking at it from a point of designing for a mobile device or designing for the desktop and just hoping the mobile can catch up. Also make sure to choose the right tools. So when does a rich client make sense? I mean, obviously there's still a lot of things that you can do on these devices in a rich client setting that you can't necessarily do on the web. And so a lot of examples are around basically data input and such, being able to manipulate images and such from within the application. You want to think about all these things. When does it make sense to have an Ajax website? I mean, obviously Ajax can give you a very a very application-like experience right from the web page. So when does it make sense to start looking at these things on a mobile device? And actually, we'll be showing you those in a moment or two. And what about a simple HTML WAP site? I mean, is there still value in pushing out basically a baseline common denominator type experience just for folks that may be trying to visit from mobile? And even further down, what about an SMS gateway? So Google has a great example. If you text a search query to Google, I think it's the number GOOGL, you can actually get a response through an SMS that actually answers your search query. So they realized that SMS is probably something that works across all phones. So if we want to get to 100% of the market share, at least folks that have text messages, that's going to be the only way we'll do it. So these are some of the tools that you can basically get in varying factors to get basically into the hands of users. So at this point, we want to bring up Sina Suraji, who actually will give you a little checkout of IE Mobile on the devices. So Sina?
Thanks, Derek. So, as you mentioned, my name's Sina, and I am here to give you a quick demo on how to get, oops. There we go. Is that? Huh? Is it far? Oh, okay. There we go. Great. All right. A little technical difficulty there, but. So this is Internet Explorer Mobile, and as you can see here, it's not a port of IE6. It is actually a browser that was built from the ground up to be a mobile-optimized browser. So here we have an MSN money site, and we can do a quick stock quote check, because you can see it. You're on the road. You want to see what your stocks are doing, things like that, and we hit Get Quote. We go out, and we'll get some results here, hopefully. And one of the things you can see here is we've got a scroll bar, a vertical and a horizontal scroll bar. As Derek was showing earlier, you really want to try to minimize the amount of horizontal scrolling that the user needs to do. And here we go. So we're getting a stock quote back. And as you can see, it's actually kind of difficult to tell what exactly is that stock quote at. You have to scroll way over there because this was optimized for a desktop, which is a lot more screen resolution. So what we did in the browser was work to make different views that bring this all together and make it a lot easier to see. So as you can see here, in this view that we have, we actually adaptively render the content to streamline it into one column. So now you can see everything on one page without having to worry about the horizontal scrolling. And now you can just do up and down scrolling. A few other things to demonstrate really quickly. You can see we have different zoom settings as well. So if you want to shrink down the page, make it look smaller, if you've got a high-resolution screen, or if you have better eyes and you want to see more text, you can zoom down. Or you can change things like that. And another demo I wanted to show really quickly was the whole idea of adaptive rendering. So here's a picture of our boss in his younger days. We'll put it into full screen so we get the full page here. And you can see this is actually an ASP page that is generating dynamic content for this particular resolution. Now this device actually can switch into landscape mode. And so let's say you're in landscape mode, the same URL, if we refresh the page, we can get content that's optimized for the other resolution. And another really important guy from Microsoft as well, the Master Chief from Halo. And you can see this content was optimized for the other direction. So just really quickly, a very simple demonstration showing you how you can adaptively render content for a particular device. And now Dave and Steve are going to show you how to really knock it out of the park with the next level here.
All right, thanks, Sina. So we're going to try to give you a quick demo of actually writing an app here in, you got your connection? In IE Mobile. So Dave's one of our dev leads on the mobile applications team. And you guys have all hopefully seen Virtual Earth, or what's now local.live.com. So it's basically our mapping application. And Dave's actually written, do we have a, there we go. So Dave's written basically a mobile version of local.live. Where what we see is local is composed of a bunch of map tiles. So each of these tiles is 256 by 256. It's about 20K. So this is great. We can bring it down to the device, no problem. The problem comes when we actually try to scroll. And so you can see the Venetian here. I wanted to scroll down and to the right a little bit and kind of see a little more of the street in front of the Venetian. Well, now I'm overlapping 4 of these graphic tiles. And so you can actually see this thing would be split up into 4 tiles, and you'd have to bring 80K down to your phone. I don't know how many of you have actually played with sort of a device that's got a lower end data connection before we've got 3G out here. It would take a long time to get 80K. And so what we actually do is we don't want to bring down all 4 tiles. We're going to proxy it on the mobile device. And I'm going to switch over and actually show you the demo. Right there. So we're actually going to proxy it to where the server will actually grab all 4 tiles for us, composite them down to a single tile, And then all we have to download is the sort of the 20K that will fit on the screen, actually a little bit less. So while we're going through, you want to
get this set here? Oh, I guess I'm on. Sorry about that. So this is a website in the Pocket Internet Explorer browser that Sina was just showing you, running on a Windows Mobile smartphone. And you can see here we've got a picture of Las Vegas that's coming straight from Virtual Earth, but I've cropped it in to only display the portion that actually fits on the phone. And I can zoom in easily here doing one-handed navigation using a very Ajax-type experience to zoom all the way into the Venetian. We're getting a real taste of actually how long it takes even to load a 3K tile over GPRS. Here we go. So we're near the Venetian Hotel. The real power of Ajax comes in, though, when I want to do a search. So Windows Local Live lets you search for things around the area of the map that you're currently viewing. If we were in Redmond back at Microsoft, we would, of course, search for Starbucks or pizza or something like that. But since we're in Vegas, we're actually going to search for Elvis.
So you can also see one of our design patterns we were talking about earlier with text input.
Right. Text input is hard.
Text input is not easy on a mobile device.
So I'm going to leave the find this place blank because I want to just search around the map and hit go. And you can see just like in an Ajax Web 2.0 app on the desktop today, we've done an internal page refresh. And we've come up with all of our lists of search items around the Venetian Hotel that are related to Elvis Presley. We have an Elvis Presley Museum as the closest hit here.
Road trip.
Excellent. We can give them a call. One of the things that Derek talked about was being able to use click to call. And I don't actually want to call these people. And we can also show them, we can add them to our contacts list if we want to call them later, if we want to send that information to our friends over Bluetooth or infrared. And we can show the location of the Elvis Museum on the map. So you can see that it is possible inside of Pocket IE and mobile browsers to actually do a very Ajax-like experience for your users.
There you go, thanks. So the reason we've showed you this was to say there are ways to mitigate things like the latency problems that we talked about earlier and a bunch of the design patterns. And I know we've thrown a whole lot of information on you in just probably about 30 minutes. There's a test. It's called The Lab over in the sandbox. You can come play with it. You can check out all the design patterns. We've got a bunch of code for you to mess around with if you want, or just browse the web on a phone and see what it looks like. So now we're actually going to bring up Kelly to talk about kind of putting this into practice in her global consulting firm. Thanks, buddy.
Hello. Hey, how many of you guys have your cell phones with you? And how many of you call them cell phones or mobile devices? Cell phones, raise your hand. Mobile devices, raise your hand. It's pretty interesting. In the US, we call these cell phones, and we use them, yes, primarily for calling. My friends were at a concert a couple weeks ago. I think it was Led Zeppelin. I'm not sure. It was in San Francisco. And they dressed up kind of old-fashioned, and they brought their lighters. Have you guys been to a concert lately? Do you know that now they hold up their phones and wave it like that at concerts? No more lighters. So it's kind of interesting how times are changing. So one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about today, we're going to kind of cover three main sections. One is I just want to lay out the landscape and sort of tell you what's going on in the US. I don't want this to be US-centric, but I want to help you understand what's going on in the rest of the world, what we have to look forward in the US in the next few years. I also want to sort of talk about something that I call design ethnography, which is based on the ethnographic field. And it's studies that we're doing quite a bit of these days because it has never been more important to understand not only people's desires, behaviors, segmentation, demographics, but actually understand their lifestyles and how they live. I also want to show you some examples of that in action, and then finally to start talking about a little bit of what's happening in today's web with social software and a little bit of the migration of both web desktop experience and then mobile devices and everything else that we're using on a regular basis. So this is the beginning. It's a quote that says, it's from this company Oyster, and it just says that, you know, what's important is to design for the user's lifestyle and what he or she wants. So it's just interesting how lifestyle is coming up more and more. I think customer experience is a new buzzword, not a new buzzword, but an old buzzword that's coming back a lot more in the marketing industry. Also, we're definitely used to the concept of user experience. But what we've been really getting into is lifestyle, understanding how people live. And I'll get into those examples in different countries in a bit. So just thinking about the mobile opportunity. Well, right now there's a lot going on in closed, I guess we call them closed environments, a little bit closed. Countries like Japan super amazing amount of SMS action going on, iMode, a lot of content and services happening. I think there was a revenue projection that in Europe, it's about €1 per person per month, average revenue per user for things other than calls. In Japan, it was something like $17. So the Japanese audience is a lot more sophisticated than what we are right now. So there's a lot of opportunity right now happening. So if you think about the US is a little bit slow, but we're catching up. And here's kind of a graph. It's a little bit old, but the stats haven't really changed that much. If you think about calling plan services, they take up about 88% of the revenue, right? So then you kind of take about 12% of that. It's between 10 and 12% projected that is being accounted for data revenue. And that has all of these things: messaging, entertainment, information. And that's really where the opportunity is for a lot of designers, developers, third-party vendors, people that are creating applications and porting them over to mobile devices, because with this revenue, it's actually projected at something like, in 2007, $16 billion. So I actually don't even believe those projections, but those are out today. I just got that report from the Wireless World Forum. And so there's a lot of projections around what we're calling mobile data services, and that's where the mobile web comes in. That's where mobile AJAX will come in, and that's really what's happening right now, and that's where we play our part. So also thinking about 3G, and 3G has been talked about a long time. I think that in different countries it's more prevalent, and you can kind of see this graph. And just to point out, by 2010, Japan is slated at being 90% penetrated in terms of 3G. The US is still at a meager 48%. However, right now, in terms of projections, the US is up there, the second highest in terms of actual users. And people between the ages of 20 and 40 are going to be nearly 100% penetration rate by the year 2008. So it's really interesting how, although we're a slow market, we're definitely one of the highest in terms of revenue. Another way I've been thinking about it is trying to understand, okay, how does the US compare, and really what is the opportunity? And I started looking at the mobile youth market. So in the mobile youth market, if you look at China, there's about 20 times the amount of youth ages 12 to 18 years old. Okay, so China's a huge market, right? We better get over to China right now and start developing for them. Well, how much average per person, per youth, between the ages of 12 and 18, how much do you think they have to spend per year? Does anybody? Just disposable revenue per year. Someone said 0. Any other numbers? 80 cents? Okay, well, actually it's about $89 per year, average. And out of that, 4% is spent on mobile, moving up to about 8%. So in the US, take average between 12 and 18 years old, how much per teen do you think they have disposable income-wise to spend per year? Parents, anybody? How much? Anybody? Too much. Okay, they have an average of, let's say, between $4,900 and $5,500 a year disposable income. So you can see that even though we are a 20th of the size in terms of that target, we have spending power that is beyond belief. And out of that, about 8% is spent on mobile. So it's just really interesting to look at the mobile youth, because they are the future. I read a study that said that the mobile phone is the new cigarette. It's the new cool. So phones are taking on a little new positioning power. I don't know how many of you have, met up with different people, and you're like, well, what are you carrying around these days? You kind of both show your phone at the same time. One person goes, man, I really need to get a new phone. So it's pretty interesting how it's becoming also a positioning and power play, even in our own, little industry right here. So this just shows you a little bit about 3G, and I'm not going to get into the details of 3G, but it is coming to the US. It's actually in 12 markets right now. Sprint and the Edge network, it's coming up pretty quickly. Wi-Fi is coming up. There's a future of WiMAX coming up. There's a lot happening, but there should be about 22 markets that have 3G access by the end of the year. And one other point about the US is that our calling plans and calling rates are actually so much better than other countries that we have a chance to break out of our low status in terms of content and services and mobile use and really move higher in the market. So mobile user experience, this is kind of a fancy name to put the M in front of something to make it mobile. But the mobile user experience, I realized as I was going through it and really charting out everything from adoption to integration, it's how important brand is. For designers in the audience, can we get a show of hands of how many people would consider themselves to be designers? How many would you consider yourselves to be developers? How many of you are specifically working in the mobile space right now, content application-wise? Okay, great. We should chat afterwards. So it's pretty interesting how all of us are, come from different disciplines. We have different things to bring to the table. But for real, branding, segmentation, understanding your audience, and doing kind of a value chain down to the actual technical side has become almost equally weighted, equally important into understanding how to create experiences for this new group. So looking at the mobile user experience, we start with the perception, which is the brand perception. And we move into interaction, which is testing for usability and effectiveness. And that we can test in a lab and see if people can actually start to use devices, content, and services. But the real magic is in integration into your actual lives. I have been deprived of my phone for a week, and it was one of the hardest weeks that I remember. I actually left it charging, because you charge it till the very last second, and then I ran out the door and caught a taxi, and I went, oh no. And no one could mail it back to me because it was in my parents' house and they were gone. So I had to go for a week without my phone, and I think that would be very hard for a lot of us because it's so integral into our lifestyles. So it's pretty interesting how those things play out. So the other thing is, well, how many of you guys wash your hands when you leave the bathroom? Right? So that's a focus group. We just asked you what you think you might do in a specific situation, but if you actually put a camera in, you're thinking, I don't need to wash my hands that time, And so you actually see 2 out of 3 people are leaving without washing their hands. That's observation. So there's a lot you can learn through asking questions, and I don't put down focus groups or surveys because I happen to think that collecting data in as many ways as you can is very important. But we have seen the usefulness and the truth of usability testing, for one, getting more into how people live, right? And then even more than that, ethnography. Now, again, I'm not claiming that what we're doing is actually the social science anthropological term ethnographic research, and a lot of companies think that they are doing ethnographic research. It's based on the principles, which is more observation of people's actual context. You get to see what other things they're actually exploring and using in their lives. There's been so many situations where we bring people into our office, but when we go to their office, we actually look at their bookmarks. We actually see what other resources they use besides the web. Some people have CD-ROMs of information and actually look at print once in a while. I know that's hard, John, for you to understand. But there's actually this need for you to understand a little bit more about how people live and how these things are actually integrated into their lives. So talking is good, but observing is even better. So there's a lot of different methods around this kind of term we call contextual inquiry. And out of it, you want to take away the things that work for your group. And one of the takeaways that I would like to say, both as a designer and someone that's worked with a lot of developers and also marketing people and people that are on the business side, is please get out and meet with your audience and talk to your customers, go to their workplaces, find out what they're doing. And I'll take you through a case study that we did that you can actually do in a week's time. And it's fairly easy. It's not going to take hundreds of thousands of dollars of research. But it's so important to take, and I start with about once a quarter, just allocating time to actually get out and meet with your customers. Not only is it fun, it's something that's different, like coming to a conference. It allows your designers to design a little bit more fluidly and with the end user in mind. And the developers really need to understand how people are using their site or their application. So it makes a big difference. Now, this is the slide that kind of blows people's mind a little bit because I'm trying to do the Tufte style of getting a bunch of information on one plane. I actually simplified this slightly. So what this is saying is that obviously we need to have a user-centered approach to mobile authoring. And if you take a look at the top level, I put in SMS and WAP push as just one means of interacting with your audience. And obviously there's a lot of different things. There's offline models. There's a lot of advertising through TV. There's all different kind of ways. There's in Japan, they have a thing called a QR code. And someone posted about it a couple months ago in the US, and everyone went, okay, that's been in existence in Japan for 3 or 4 years now. And we're just starting to learn about it in the US. And what that is they have a similar version called the shot code that's actually out in Europe and heading into the US, where you take a picture of a little barcode with your camera phone, and it automatically directs you to a WAP site or pulls information in. You can actually get music. You can actually see different things on the web. So it's a very interesting call to action. Imagine if you're walking down a street, you go by a realty firm, all the realty things that they have posted on the windows, and you see something that's pretty interesting and they're closed, and you just take your camera out and take a picture of that shot code, automatically puts that information into your directory, gives you the contact information that you can follow up with your real estate person when the time comes, and or it gives you a GPS positioning or a map so that you can actually go view it on your own. So there's a lot of things like that that are coming out that are super interesting. So that's the first layer. Now that's the first layer of attack also, because with mobile, as you would expect, you need to segment very carefully. So really, the approach to mobile marketing and strategy is going to be all about understanding how you want to approach your audience, what types of devices they're on, how often they're going to use it. And I'll talk about MVNOs just a little bit later, but that is the ultimate in branding and audience segmentation. So you go down a channel. Now here's some terms I want you to understand. There's thin client, smart client, and thick client. And I added in rich client in there because to me, rich client and smart client are very similar in terms of the type of interaction that you want. And if you know these terms, that's great, but just kind of keep it into your vocabulary so you can go back to your workplace and say, hey, we have a thin client here and a smart client over here, and I'm not talking about your current client list. So what we have is thin client is a little bit more about just web browsing. You're going out and seeking information. Nothing really happens. They're not pushing information towards you. You're just sitting there and viewing something like a WAP site. If we get into web-based services, we get into a little bit more of a smart client solution. And that's when you have a hybrid of a type of web app that you can actually download and you get all the benefits of the robustness and the stability of that actual device. But you have the ability to search out when you're live, when you're connected, and gather updated information and data. And that's really smart client. And it will move into what we will be doing with rich client, with mobile Ajax and everything coming out. And then thick client are downloadable apps, things that live on your phone. You don't need to be connected in order to make them work. So there's a number of other things, and mostly with the mobile web, which is where I'm really concentrating as a hybrid between what I do now as an organization. We build websites, to moving into applications and moving into product design and ubiquitous computing. So you're talking about all the different touch points that your customers have. It's not just creating. I mean, Derek talked about designing for the desktop versus designing for mobile, and it really is a hybrid of both in that you have to think about the fact that people are just going to be touching on your website, touching on your mobile device, and they're going to consider that part of the complete experience they have with your company or your organization. So it really needs to work together in the most fluid way possible. So hopefully you'll understand a little bit of how that works and how segmentation needs to be dealt with like channels of a television set. And that's how you have to start parsing out the content information that you currently have in your organization into things that people can actually bite off and digest little by little. So this is a process map, and the reason why this came about is because I actually looked at extremeprogramming.org. And I don't know if you've seen that website, but I'm a real fan of understanding Agile Manifesto, and extreme programming is a bunch of engineers that decided that they didn't want to document anymore. And so they really embraced the concept of iterative cycles. And I think Scrum, is that right? Scrum is something we just were at South by Southwest, and they were Six Apart was talking about it. And this methodology is really being embraced. But again, it's that hybrid that we just learned with expression about the designers and the developers really working together. So what we've been doing at GoToMedia is, because we are process people and process oriented, is we're trying to understand how this all works. So the first part is just understanding that there's a lifestyle approach. And so if you really get into understanding lifestyle-driven user experience, you realize that it's desire-based, it's scenario-based. That's where all of the initial use cases come out. I'm not going to get into technical documentation, specification creation right now, but this is a philosophy that you know in the back of your head, but there's very few organizations that actually embrace this as a culture. So we take a look also at the business needs. So this is something that all of us have to deal with, time to market, understanding what the drivers are. You want a certain amount of revenue by a certain amount of time. We have this amount of budget that's put in. That's just as much of a driver as anything else. And lastly, of course, we have the engineers, functionally oriented, technically feasible. You got that beta and prototype together. But you can see that those three sections are not connected, right? So you have the end user's goals and desires, which is the lifestyle, and you have the beta prototype, which just doesn't get you there quite yet. So we start getting into other models, and I'll just flip through some of these really quickly. And if you look at testing and analysis, usability testing, contextual interviews, observation, you start getting a lot of feedback at the initial stages of the development cycle, and you understand a little bit more of what the needs and behaviors are, what kind of use cases you do want to build, what kind of scenarios are the real scenarios that they're living in. And so this type of analysis, this ethnographic-based study, really needs to take place at the beginning of the process. So during each release cycle, this center part is really supposed to indicate this is your initial release, but it doesn't stop just there. And I know that in software, a lot of companies have embraced the concept of iterative cycles, but a lot of companies that are just moving from the web to understanding 2.0 and getting into more robust desktop application style thinking, they haven't really embraced the amount of testing and refinement that needs to happen throughout the process. So we really get into, in the end, we move into what the end goal is, which is really this lifestyle-driven behavior, something that, sorry, it's like, whoa, I'm getting a headache. It exceeds expectation. It's really driving the experience home. It's something that's integrated almost without thinking into people's behavior, lifestyle, and they don't even think about the mobile as a mobile. They think about it as one touch point of continuing that experience all the way through. So that's really important to understand. So moving back into here, this lifestyle process is something that we're continuing to work on. I do have it posted on our website. And what I would really like to use it as in the future is a means and a platform to develop a new way of thinking and communicating between designers and developers. So, and business, and the business side as well. So getting into ethnography, it's interesting. There's a woman named Genevieve Bell, and she's an ethnographer at Intel. And she says, you know, it's just deep hanging out. One of her professors said it's just about hanging out with people, understanding how they live. And these studies took years to complete. We're trying to do something in a week, right? So we have this process put together, and there's other companies that have engaged in this rapid ethnography type of thinking. But what we've done is taken it a step further, and we've developed a network of countries that are engaging this practice. So we can do rapid ethnography tests in a very short time frame, because these, you know, one of the things about mobile is it's moving at 20 times to, I don't know, 50 times the pace of the web, and so you really need to move fast to keep up. So we move from having a test plan screening participants, observation, which can take 2 hours or a week, however you want to do it, and you move into doing a photo diary, which I'll explain in a minute, follow-up, compiling, reporting. So it's pretty straightforward. And just as a case study, what we did was we had 5 participants in 3 different countries. We took 2 hours to a full day to observe them, take notes, get them to understand exactly the types of questions, and it really works best, again, in brainstorming mode, and you try and get people to think aloud. And at one point, we actually had to do a truck driver that lived in the suburb, that had short delivery cycles, that had 2 kids, and had their own house. And it was really interesting, because the closer your profile, especially in different countries, the more important it's going to be. So photo diary is you ask the participants to take photo diaries, and then interview, so repeat that. And so you really understand a little bit more how they live. So just to go through this again, you know, this is David. He's in the US. And the thing that's interesting about the US is that we live here, so we don't really have an insight. I lived in New Zealand for a couple months last year, and calls, every single call was about 75 cents. So it was really fascinating how, you know, people are more inclined to use SMS because of that. Someone came from Germany, where you have to pay if you make a call to a mobile from your landline. You have to pay a lot from mobile to mobile. And when she came here, she said, oh my God, if I knew, if we had the same pricing plan, I'd be on the phone all the time. So we don't really understand how lucky we are in our pricing plans and the way things are set up. In Singapore, it's again, device-oriented. This is Yaling, and she has, you know, her 6-month-old at home, and her lifestyle is completely different. She has 2 devices. One is a fashion statement, another one's for a calling plan. And then in Finland, they use this as a mobile device, and we also looked into this concept of always on. So some of just the brief differences in the US, again, I mentioned at the very beginning that we think of it as a cell phone. We still call it a phone. We use it as a phone. We have not integrated into SMS, and there's a whole history behind that about why Americans don't adopt as quickly. We're very comfortable with things the way they are, actually. And then moving into Singapore and Finland, where in Finland they use the calendar SMS, you know, obviously all the time. It's also interesting, when I was in Europe recently, I just noticed people took calls in restaurants and also during meetings, and we would think that would be completely rude, but there's just a cultural aspect to it as well. And then in Singapore, where they have, you know, fashion, phone, and everyone has 2 devices. So just quickly, mobile social software is the one area that I see is exploding. Definitely, it's been talked about a lot. The partnership with this Helio and MySpace is really huge. We saw the keynote, MySpace talking, and this segmentation, this approach to understanding people's lifestyle, again, is going to make or break people's business models in the future. Shozu is something that's very similar to Flickr in terms of uploading, but it's a really simple tool to use. Mobilicious. Dodgeball is something that everyone was using at South by Southwest, where you get SMS messages with events that your peer group is engaging in a very geographical location area. And then Places, you can actually track where you are. This isn't as much a mobile thing as it is a Wi-Fi thing, so wherever you're logged in, it will actually track you and show you where you are in the world, and you can then interact with other people. But the social networking and this integration of work, pleasure, socialization, everything is being integrated. It's really going to be the new business model. This is Yellow Tag, where you actually engage in a little bit of offline tagging, which is a tag that has a short code message attached to it. So if you dial in that code, a message will come back from someone that's placed that tag, so you get a little bit of history there. So this is DuoSnap, and this is a Japanese site that you actually can take a look at, and it uses, I'm not going to install that right now. It's Japanese. And what it does is it actually geolocates images and photographs that are taken by mobile phones into a browser setting. And it's a beautiful demo, but we don't really have time to look at that right now, so that's OK. So DuoSnap is something that, again, as a designer and as a developer, it's really best practices. And we think about product design where aesthetics, functionality, usability, and marketability are all taken into consideration from the get-go as an industry standard. And that's really what we're moving forward with in this industry as well. So Helio, this is the example of the MySpace Helio kind of connection. And this is an MVNO. And what that stands for is Mobile Virtual Network Operator. And what they're doing is they're riding off of the coattails of someone else that spent billions of dollars on infrastructure. And they are just targeting and marketing as cleanly as they can to the target audience of choice. And these companies are really setting a standard, especially in the US, for other countries to follow for the first time. This is a guide that we developed, the 3G UIA guide, and this is a San Francisco version. And we were just looking at it in different, doing mobile mashup, which is combining, Craigslist or other data and opportunities into a very customized experience for an insider guide in San Francisco. And this is the blog Go to Mobile. Hopefully you guys can come there and engage in a discussion along with myself and some other people from around the world in understanding mobile user experience and what the future has to hold. So thank you very much.
So our goal is to make this the most action-packed session in all of MIX. You sensory overload yet? But wait, there's more. So we have a bit more to cover. But I talk fast and you think fast, so we'll get along just fine. My name is John Sangiovanni from Microsoft Research. We thought it might be fun to end with a vision piece about single-handed interaction, adaptive interaction across a wide variety of different platforms. So I'm a program manager with Microsoft Research, and a quick snapshot overview and disclaimer of MSR. At Microsoft, R&D are actually organizationally independent. Very collaborative relationship with the product teams, but actually geographically they're in a different place, just on the other side of the interstate. But the idea is that there's this very active conversation with the product teams, yet Microsoft Research is tasked to work on projects that are sort of transcend any one individual product cycle or any one product family, so that we can think about multi-year projects and kind of cross-divisional ideas of user interaction. I'm going to focus on two different concepts, and the disclaimer portion of this is that the things I'm going to show are really focused on advancing the state of the art and really shown at academic research conferences like CHI or WIST. In fact, both of these projects, XNav, a single-handed interaction model for text input, non-handwriting, non-speech, non-typing, and then adaptive interaction launch tile, a project done with the University of Maryland. These were actually two projects that were done collaboratively with academic research partners, NYU and University of Maryland respectively. So this is actually a novel model for us to get some feedback on kind of rich next generation futures interaction models for mobile devices and take some thinking and thoughts from outside of the Microsoft gene pool. It's a very sort of nice model for collaboration. And then we have an ongoing dialogue with the product teams. So while the things that you're going to see certainly have, we hope, will influence future generations of Microsoft products, what I'm going to show is not a representation of any future generation Microsoft products specifically. So in the goal of these two things, I want to first talk about designing for one hand and specifically about text input systems. Text input is hugely important on a mobile device. In fact, in the first couple generations of mobile devices, we would actually try and minimize the amount of text input altogether because most people just use it as a view-only device. Well, now, as Derek mentioned, although we want to try and minimize our text input a bit, that's somewhat naive in the sense that mobile applications are very interactive. And of course, we're always trying to shoehorn the interaction model that was relevant to the last technology into the new technology. The first generation of devices you would use with a stylus, much like you would a piece of paper. The second generation, you would use a thumb keyboard, much like you do on a typewriter. And we always try and do this as an interaction community, right? The first generation of automobiles, you would steer with reins, like on a carriage. And they're like, no, no, that's not right. And then the second generation, you would steer with a tiller, like on a boat. And they're like, no, no, that's not right. And then eventually they came to an interaction model that was relevant to the machine, and that stuck for 100 years. So usually when people think about the problem space of text input, there's a couple sliders to optimize for. Of course, the first and most important slider is speed of input. The second one is ease of use. And most people stop there. Most people just focus on those two. And that's actually how we got to the interaction model of a thumb keyboard, which frankly is a spectacular interaction model. It's fast. It's very easy to use. Even if it is derived from an old text input system, it actually is quite relevant to mobile devices. However, when we started this project 5 years ago, we tried to think much more general and tried to think about what are the next few sliders to add on. So one of the things I wanted to add was explicit design for international. And while I won't have time to show this in our brief time together today, every design decision that we made was really designed to support international with the same interaction architecture. So the text input system I'm going to show, we've actually already implemented it for hiragana, katakana, kanji, simplified, and traditional Chinese. So it's a very, very international system. Another one that's very important is single-handed interaction. You want to do everything, including text input, with one hand. This has all kinds of nice applications. We also want to design it for eyes-free input. That's another slider. And those two together actually make it a very accessible solution for people with physical impairments or vision impairments, but also, as Jake Wabrock from Carnegie Mellon calls it, situational impairments. A lot of times you want to interact with your device with one hand without looking because you're doing something that demands your attention, driving. So there's a lot of different things like that that we designed when we came up with this system. So the first thing I did was I looked in the landscape of text input and tried to see what work had been done around single-handed interaction. And the reality is that there was not a whole lot that had been done, but I found one thing that was really spectacular that was done by Dr. Ken Perlin at NYU, Center for Advanced Technology. You might recognize Dr. Perlin. He actually is an Academy Award-winning mathematician who develop Perlin noise. So he also did this system called virtual serial chording, which Microsoft has since licensed, again, for the sake of this research project. The way virtual serial chording works is that it lays out the characters into this array of 9 zones. And throughout the course of my talk, I'm going to focus on this idea of an interaction flower, this central kind of interaction device where we try and concentrate all of the user interaction chrome. That makes it inherently cross-device adaptive. I mentioned that Microsoft research groups are really separate from Microsoft product teams, largely because we're trying to think about advancements in the state of the art that are relevant to a bunch of different technologies. So everything you're going to see here is relevant to a phone, a touchscreen-based PDA Pocket PC, a ultra-mobile PC like an origami device, all the way up to potentially a gaming controller, a single analog stick, and even into a television remote control. All those interaction models we try and keep very, very consistent across a wide range of different devices. That's called adaptive UI. While I'm showing you here, just to give you an idea of what you're looking at, although I'm going to demo this on a touch screen, it actually is not explicitly designed just to work on a touch screen. It's also designed to work on a phone pad with a special capacitive sensing array that we initially designed and patented, which is a dual-layer sensing array where you have a capacitive sensor behind the keys. You can smash the keys and push the buttons, but you can also roll over type of them. Nowadays, thanks to Motorola and Apple, these parts of a dual-layer capacitive sensing array is actually quite commonplace from a variety of different OEM vendors, so we don't have to build our own, and their implementations are much more elegant than mine anyways. But moving forward, so think about when you see this that what I'm probably doing is dragging my thumb around a surface that's in a physical location separate from the display, but there's some type of tactile feedback pattern, like these barriers, which were also scientifically designed and also visually designed to be a visual landmark. So the way virtual serial chording works is that every stroke begins and ends in the center. For example, if I wanted to execute a B, first I start in the hub. You always start in the hub. And the first stroke is up into the zone where that character lives. Now, without lifting your thumb, the next stroke is going to be where that character is in that zone as it's relative to the entire nav. So in the case of B, I'm going to come back into the top zone and then back into the hub. And that quick loop gives me a B. If I wanted to do a C, for example, you can probably figure out figure out to go up here, over to the far right, and then back into the hub. That executes a C. And then if I want to do an A is actually a very common character, so that would just be a quick gesture up into and then back into the hub. Now, the nice thing about this design is that because, and we'll talk about completion in a second, that's part of the puzzle, but not explicitly part of the puzzle, because we wanted this to be a truly deterministic system. So you can use it for anything, slang, proper names. You can use it without looking and not waiting for visual feedback from a completion coach. And the coolest thing about this is because every stroke begins and ends in the center, that means that every letter flows into the next letter. So what you cognitively learn are shapes for words, and this is what gives you really wicked speed. There's all kinds of other advancements. For example, to do a space is just center, pedal, center, very, very quick. Doing multiple spaces is very fast. Backspace is the same way. Also, there's these shift modes where you just do a quick loop with your thumb. That puts you into a special character mode, and you can execute a certain character. So that's a quick overview of how it works. There's some subtleties in the design optimization here. This phrase is actually the frequency of use in English of letters, which is "et unschedule." Anyways, that phrase is the frequency of use. So we actually carefully designed the letter pattern. This is actually a sequential optimized letter pattern so that the most frequent characters, A, E, I, space, backspace, are all very fast, whereas the characters that take a little bit longer to execute, like a V, are less frequent characters. So that's kind of a unique approach. If you look at even when you're writing, a character like O is a very common letter, but it requires a fair amount of stylus travel. In this case, it's just a quick flick of the thumb. So what I think this is a good time is, let me just stop for a quick, and I'll give you a quick overview of XNav running on, in this case, we'll do it on ultra mobile PC because that's, you know, all the rage this 5 minutes. Let's turn on this guy. Great. Okay. Up. So this is actually a previous generation ultra mobile PC that is the Sony U, and I'll be demoing on that. Let's see if you can let it autofocus for a second. Let me turn off the light, in fact. You'll see I'm running a Japanese OS because, well, just because. Nice. So here you can see, here's the little XNav interaction widget. It's, you know, it's kind of semi-transparent. And you can see that I can quickly interact with it just by kind of thumbing in words, H-E-L-L-O. Very, very fast kind of gestural movements. Now, center pedal center movements are for text input. Wah, I can do high-speed text input, right? I can also do, if I wanted to do return, that's just this gesture. So I can do return, and I can, you know, quickly input text. Oops. Cool. There we go. Now, there's a couple other cool twists. For example, what if I were to do center pedal lift? That's a different gesture. Of course, single tap on the zones themselves to give you numeric input. But center pedal lift is a little bit more flexible, where I can go center pedal and then lift. That gives me a nice insertion point movement. So again, imagine doing all this with a single thumb on the keypad of a cell phone. You can imagine this is a very, very fast way to interact. There's a couple other cool things, like we have a built-in model for predictive completion. So let's say I wanted to write a long word like education, ED. I start writing it. You can see that the system in the four corners guesses the 4 candidate words that I might want to complete. If I want one of those words, then all I do is I drag in from that corner. Again, I don't tap on the word because that would break the interaction architecture across multiple devices. But if I simply drag in from the upper left-hand corner, that's a lift pedal center, and I can just roll right into the next word. So those are global per language and never change. And what's nice about that is that gives you speed, because even when you're not looking at the device, you can do ED drag in. You quickly learn gestural shorthands for these words. Let me switch back into the deck, and again, a quick brief statement about multi-language support is that this system, because everything is into and out of the center, when you have a language with a very large library, a very large alphabet set, then it actually works extremely well on large character set systems, because all you do is you make a tree and you just go back into the center one more time. So it just resolves the text input options as you flow into and out of the center. And all you have to do is install a software module, and it changes the system for international support. Very, very cool system. And in fact, that system is development, again, collaborative development between Microsoft Research and the NYU Center for Advanced Technology. So the next thing I want to talk about is adaptive interaction. And sort of in the same spirit as what you've seen with the XNav system, I want to talk about a slightly different type of interaction flower. So the idea on a touchscreen device or a ultra-mobile PC is that a lot of times it's actually very difficult to do direct manipulation interaction with a device with a touchscreen for a variety of reasons. Mainly because when you're walking or standing, you have all this physiological slack between outstretched hands. It's very hard to keep a consistent vector when you're trying to hit a hit target. So that's why these hit targets have to be extremely large. However, one interesting model is that humans have actually very good control of tap, drag, release because you have this grounded control over the surface and you're on the same hand. So as a result, we have this very simple interaction grammar where you can move the interaction flower with your finger, or you can move the zoom space with your finger, and of course you can see the plus and minus are zoom in and out characters. Likewise, overlaid on our capacitive sensing array, these things could be done just by dragging over top of the surface, and then zoom in, zoom out, or core context selections are done by smashing the keys themselves. And again, that can be done, for the most part, eyes free. Another nice thing about this is that over time, all of the interaction chrome fades away. And now you're interacting in a very pure way directly with the application without any chrome in your way. And I'll actually demo this live on the Ultra Mobile PC in a second. Another inherently nice thing about this concept, about this design, is that it's resolution, orientation, and size independent. As long as you keep the hit targets a consistent, square, 1 centimeter square is what we've tested to be a consistent finger hittable target, then you can use it on a wide array of different resolutions and even a wide array of different input hardware. So you can understand how this would work on a smartphone class device without a touch screen but with a conventional keypad, or on a device with a touch screen, or even a roller rocker because it has this very radial design, very radial navigation. So we're really trying to think about this cross design, and ultra mobile PCs are a very important part of this puzzle as well. So we've designed this for that as well. So let me switch back over to the device and give you a quick snapshot of what this looks like. And actually, I want to offer thanks to our research partners at the University of Maryland, Aaron Clamage, Amy Carlson, and Ben Betterson actually developed this application. So here we are. Give it some time. Gotta do it. There we go. Slowly. Good. So you can see that the interaction widget just sort of interactivity, it kind of faded out. What I'll do is I'll just do the standard Windows Mobile tap and hold gesture and you'll see a little animation as it flies open. And now I have this interaction widget. I can move it to a center of focus, kind of zoom in. Sorry for the raster map, I got lazy. But you can move the zoom space, move the interaction flower, and then I can zoom back out. And you can very quickly see how you could modify this. In fact, if I tap in the center, you can see now that it's our XNav text input system. So if I wanted to do some quick geotagging, and then again, the system goes away altogether. If I have an interaction widget off the screen, then I can just pop it up by hitting a key, and then I can zoom back out. Now, you might ask, this is great for a single mapping application. In fact, mapping applications are inherently a good zoom space because it's a zoomable user interface by its nature. How does this apply to more general purpose applications, like a shell, for example? Well, the cool thing about the shell is that the way we perceive it is that the shell is actually just one step up in the semantic zoom space of the interaction architecture. So if I want to come up, I'm zooming in and out of this map, but then if I want to come up further, then I just zoom out again and zoom out again. It takes me into an entire kind of zoomable space. I can navigate around each of these different applications. This is me in an email application. I can put focus on a certain email. Even though these are very small hit targets, I can drag and still get very, very high resolution. I can even move the insertion point in between individual letters, do text input, zoom out, navigate around the zoom space, zoom out to the 36-tile view, zoom back in, zoom back in. It's a very, very fast interface. And those sort of zoomable user interfaces, we think actually work inherently well for a mobile and, a mobile and an ultra-mobile experience. It actually scales up and down very nicely. We also have versions of this running on Pocket PC and on smartphone. And in fact, we presented this together with our partners at the University of Maryland at the CHI conference. It was actually one of the papers that was nominated for Best Paper. And to be clear, all of this under the umbrella of Microsoft Research is designed very much in the kind of open conversation about next generation futures. Our colleagues in the product teams are very focused on these very deep software engineering challenges. And you've met a handful of our rockstar engineers that are very focused on these problems, really testing and user validation with real users. Whereas at the other end of the spectrum, you have kind of Microsoft Research is focused on these kind of blue sky explorations without any real pragmatic focus. So the kind of balance between the two of these is really what makes some of the more interesting conversations within Microsoft, because we have this very open conversation. And everything that you've seen is actually available as a published academic paper, and in most cases it's actually available for intellectual property licenses from our partners or even our competitors. So that's a quick snapshot of Microsoft Research and mobile device futures. I think this is actually a good segue for us to invite the rest of the presenters up on stage and take a few questions. We should have about 10 minutes in the session left to walk through a few questions that you might have. If you'd approach the mics, please, if you have questions.
There's got to be some question, even if it's just, what did you guys just talk about?
Everyone's hungry.
Yeah, it happens.
Hi, James Williamson from Lodestone Digital, and I have never developed a mobile app, but one of the things that I have been interested in is with the websites that I do design, creating style sheets that work for handheld devices. And one of the frustrations that I've got is that a lot of the handheld devices that are out there don't actually honor the handheld media type. They try to emulate the screen media type. Is that something that you see that as designers we're just going to have to do some type of switching of applications at the application level, like the .NET, seeing the tag ID, or do you ever see actually having some standards evolve where CSS can drive that instead?
So I guess CSS mobile profile is maybe part of what you're talking about. And I think the actual sort of, to answer the day-to-day question, they don't all respect it, and that's why we say you have to test on real phones. That's the best answer we can give you, is that just, people do try to kind of interpret, we pretend they're a desktop browser, or we think we can do a better job if we use that instead of the mobile phone. Maybe it's a differentiator for a product, whatever. That's kind of where adaptive rendering comes in, and you have to detect what they're actually doing. But yeah, long term, Sid is actually probably better to comment on that, but mobile profile is the right idea. You're going down the right track.
A quick note would be that the IE mobile browser actually does support the mobile profile, and we're also looking forward to what we can do to support CSS 2.0, for example, which would make a lot of those problems you're having go away if we have full support like the desktop browser would for that CSS profile.
Any other questions? You can just shout them out and we can repeat them if that's easier. Nope.
Sensory over there.
Actually, the app.
We did actually show some mobile Ajax. I don't know if you were here. The virtual Earth demo for. Oh, Atlas, you're right. Ajax, it has supported it since about 2002 or 2003. Yeah. So the ability to do XML HTTP requests and receive back XML, parse the XML, manipulate the DOM has been possible in Pocket Internet Explorer for a long time. However, the capabilities of doing Atlas, which is this very large JavaScript library that, quite frankly, won't even fit on the phone, is going to be a little bit further out. So yes, you can do Ajax on the mobile phone today. You cannot do Atlas on the mobile phone.
I've got one more question. You were talking a lot about research on text input. Where you didn't mention anything about speech recognition for text input. Where's that going, and how far along are you guys in researching that?
It's a great question. I can talk a bit about that. So speech is hugely important, and in fact, Microsoft has one of the largest research groups in the world focused on speech input. One of the reasons why I focused on non-speech is really mainly because of the social context of the ways and the places that people use speech, particularly on a mobile device. This is especially evident in some of the Asian markets, particularly in Tokyo, where there's extreme mobile device use, but there's complete human silence on the subways, which are elevated, and they have, or the train system, public transit's largely elevated, and people have telephony access, but it's very antisocial to communicate on the phone using voice. The same can be said often in many social contexts where voice is just not appropriate. Another thing about voice is that even the best, in fact, every ultra-mobile PC comes with voice recognition, and it's extremely high-quality, user-specific voice recognition. And it works very well, for example, if you're in your office, or even if you're in your car, you want to do quick voice recognition. Many of the Windows CE-based automotive computing systems use speech recognition, because that's very important. But as a general-purpose text input technology for today, and even in the next 3 or 4 years, it turns out that there's certain social taboos, particularly in the international stage, against using voice as a text input mechanism.
From the product side, we do have voice command, which works on smartphone and Pocket PC, and is built into the Windows Mobile Trio device.
So I think our tech crew's been working real hard. Well, taking that question, but our tech crew's been working really hard all day, so we need to let them go. We can either stand up here and you can just shout questions at us, but we probably have to kill the webcast, or maybe we just do a little offline in the room with anybody that's got questions. We'd love to stay up here and talk as long as you want, but I know we got to let them go.
Okay. One more question.
So I thought that the interaction flower, that's really a cool idea. I was curious about the applicability of it with pin-based input. You showed it with your finger. I assume it would work with a pin, but thought I'd ask.
Sure. Actually, it's kind of a cool twist. Again, we didn't have time to show, but if you use it on a tablet PC, you might have noticed there's a little hover button, which was right above the 2 zone. And the hover button actually gives you kind of always on. And on a tablet PC, it's very cool because you can do super high-speed text input, and you never even touch the screen. You just kind of fly your stylus over top of the display, and because there's no concept of an explicit pen down event, then you can do very, very high-speed text input in hover mode. So yeah, in fact, it works today on tablets very well.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for your time.